Welcome everyone to the San Antonio Storytellers Story Night. We always meet the very first Wednesday of each month. And this comes right after our big haunting tales along the river concert. And we had a fabulous time at Confluence Park. And we had some fantastic storytellers. And we had actually some drama happening with the wind blowing there. It was so much fun. But fortunately, we were able to edit out some of that. But you too could actually watch this concert online. We finished all the edits and we put in the original version, the one that my husband put together. It is on the San Antonio Storytellers YouTube channel. So you just go to YouTube. Then in the search window, type in San Antonio Storytellers, and you'll see a bunch of great videos come up. Just go to the very first one, and that would be our haunting tales along the river, if you still want to get a scare. So I think that should be a lot of fun. And we'll go ahead and just kind of think this is the month of November. There's a lot going on. We never ask for themes here, so all stories are welcome as long as they're somewhat family friendly. We try to keep our stories around 9, no more than 10 minutes, unless we just have a few tellers, and you can tell until the cows come home. So it should be fine. And we're going to go ahead and get started with our very first storyteller tonight, Susan Whipple. Susan was one of our SASA tellers at our concert the other night, and I believe she would like to share that story tonight with everybody. So without further ado, let's bring Susan up to the stage.
This story begins in the 1920s, just about 100 years ago. It's about a lovely young couple who moved to Minneapolis. Their names were Addie and Theodore. Theodore had just landed a wonderful new job, one that would bring them a comfortable income. So comfortable, in fact, that they were able to make a contract with the best builder in Minneapolis to design and build a home for them, and in the most desirable neighborhood of the city. It was Addie's responsibility every day to go to the building site and to check out what everybody was doing and make sure it was the right thing and answer all the questions. But in the evening, she and Theodore would drive by, and she would go through the whole routine of what had happened during the day and get him up to speed. They were really looking forward to moving into the house before too long. In the meantime, they rented a small furnished apartment in a big, old, huge Victorian house. The woman who owned it was a widow, and in order to make ends meet, she renovated the house and made small apartments in it, and she rented those out. Each apartment had a small kitchen, a nice sitting room, a big bedroom, and a tiny bathroom, but it was all that they needed. From time to time, Addie would meet another tenant in the house, a woman just a few years older than she. And at first, they didn't speak, they just nodded to each other. And then after a while, they said good morning or good evening, depending on what time of the day it was. And finally, they introduced themselves, and a friendship began. Addie discovered that her new friend Martha was a recent widow, and she had had to sell her house, and she moved into the big old Victorian. Well, Addie was really glad to have a new friend, and Martha too was good with it, because when she felt sad and when she especially missed her husband and when the tears came to her eyes, Addie would hold her around and comfort her. And so time passed. One night, Addie went into the bedroom to get ready for bed. She sat down at her dressing table and she took off her earrings and she took off her necklace, but she really wasn't looking at the mirror and she wasn't thinking about what she was doing. She was thinking about the house. And she was thinking that pretty soon they would be able to start ordering furniture for it. Then she came to the beautiful pin that she always wore on her blouse. It was a beautiful, gorgeous pin that Theodore had given her when they first became engaged. And she loved seeing it in the mirror. And she was looking in the mirror and she was looking at the pin, and all of a sudden something caught her eye. And it was the figure of a man sitting across the room. He was dressed in a well-cut dark suit, and he was just sitting there watching her at her dressing table. Well, at first she gave a start. She was frightened. But then she realized that this man was in no way threatening. It was like he was waiting for her. She decided to get up from her seat and walk over, and she walked part of the way, and the man got up and he walked part of the way. And he was looking at her, but she realized suddenly that he was not blinking his eyes. Well, they finally came together and he led the way out of the bedroom and she followed, and he walked through the rest of the apartment and came to the door that led to the hall, and he opened that, went out, and she followed him. They turned left and started walking down the long hallway, and neither one said a word. They finally came to the other apartment at the end of the hallway, and Addie realized that was Martha's apartment. Well, the man opened the door and he stepped out of the way and moved off to the side to go sit down. And she took only 2 steps before she realized what was going on in front of her. And she shrieked, she yelled. What was happening was that Martha was lying on the carpet in front of her in the living room. Blood all around her, and her arms were out in front of her, blood flowing from her cut wrists. Oh, well, Addie rushed over to her and she felt for her pulse, first in her neck and then in her chest. And she could feel her heartbeat, but it was very, very faint. She got down on her knees and she started ripping strips of cloth from her petticoat, and she wrapped them around Martha's wrists. And it took a while, but after a while, the blood flow settled down and it stopped flowing. So she took Martha's head in her lap and she stroked her and she patted her and she said, "Martha, it's going to be all right. You'll be okay. Everything will be all right." While she was speaking, she looked around her, and right there at the coffee table, she saw a half-empty bottle of whiskey, a glass that was turned over on its side, and a bloody straight-edged razor. Well, at that point, Theodore had come in, having heard her scream from down the hall. And he said, he looked at it, he knew what was going on. He turned on his heel, he walked out, he says, "I'm going for help." Well, pretty soon he was back with 2 policemen. And the policeman said, "The ambulance is on its way." So they waited a little while. You know, in those days, everything took a lot longer. And finally, they could hear the ambulance attendants pounding up the stairs. And they came in, they saw what was going on, and they went to help Martha. And the others just stood around and waited. And after a short time, they got everything stabilized, and they very gently lifted her and put her into the stretcher, and they carried her down to the waiting ambulance. Well, it was a terrible, terrible shock for Addie. I mean, it was really a scary thing for her. And Theodore put his arms around her and he comforted her, and he was so sweet. And she felt a little better in the warmth of his embrace. And then she thought about the man who had led her to where Martha was, led her there while there was still time. And she looked at him, for him, at the other side of the room where there was the chair where he had sat down, and he wasn't there. Well, she didn't know what to think, but she kept on looking around the room. And on the far side, there was a sideboard, and there were some framed pictures, several of them on the sideboard. And one of them she could make out was Martha's wedding picture. So she distanced herself from Theodore, and she walked over there slowly, and she picked up Martha's wedding picture, and Martha looked beautiful. And then her husband, her groom, was there, and she looked at that man and she said, "That's it. That's who it was. It was her husband." Her husband was the one who led Addie to help her. Even though he could no longer share their life together, he was still looking out for her.
Yep. All right. That was just from the heart. I love that story. Thank you so much, Susan. Our next teller is actually on Zoom tonight, and Elizabeth Beeman is with us. Thank goodness. We love when she comes, hopefully to always tell, sometimes to be a listener, because, you know, us storytellers, we have to have our listeners also. So we so appreciate storytelling and listening, lovers of stories. Elizabeth's here tonight to share a tale. Just to give you a little background with Elizabeth, she is a retired librarian, but also she's very much involved with the Texas storytelling. And one of the big things that she just accomplished is, you know, she's also part of another guild up in the Dallas area, but she just finished a wonderful puppet workshop. So wish we could have been there. Sounds like it was marvelous. And, you know, what a great way to incorporate puppets, but through story. So hopefully we'll get a chance to see that workshop at a later date, especially if you guys want to ever come to Denton for the Tejas Storytelling Festival. So without further ado, here is Elizabeth Beeman.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm so grateful for the technology that Sue reached out to me and said, "Remember, we have our SASA tonight." Oh, I forgot. So my husband is watching the Texas Rangers, and I said, "Oh, I'm going to go slip into our bedroom, and I'll make you a peanut butter sandwich after we have our thing."
Bravo.
That's right. That's his favorite. Well, I have a story to celebrate the Day of the Dead. Today is celebrated. That is one of the things celebrated. And my story is about my parents. In 1963, my mother in September, had just had her last child, baby Jeff, and he was born in September. And so while she was, you know, taking care of him, he's the last of six. And of course, she had all of us to take care of. And so while she was doing that, she didn't really mess with the checkbook. So about the middle of October, maybe Jeff was 6 weeks old, maybe the 1st of November, she got the checkbook and started to balance it. She loved the checkbook to be just to the penny. And so she was looking at it, and there was a new entry that my father hadn't told her about. It was for $200. And so when he came home for lunch, you know, she put the baby down and she said, "Robert, there's an entry here for $200 to the Methodist Church. Why is that?" And he said, "Oh, I got such a deal. When you were in the hospital with Jeff, someone came to me and they sold me plots to the cemetery. We can bury 12 people in this plot." Right? And we have 6 children, and there's the 2 of us, and maybe your parents. You know, it was such a good deal. She goes, "Robert, $200. We didn't have $200 for that." They got into one of the most intense arguments about that. She said, "I don't want to think about death. We are only in our 30s. I don't want to think about that." And he said, well, whether you want to think about it or not, someday we're all going to be dead. Oh, she was horrified that he would even speak like that. And so back and forth, they went back and forth. And she said, what about it being written to the Methodist Church? Where is this gravesite? He said, well, a long time ago, the Methodists sold their old church to the Lutherans, and that's where we attend. We're Lutherans, right? Well, yes. And so right next to the Lutheran church is the Methodist cemetery. Isn't that handy? Oh, she said. She was not happy. And they back and forth argued about that a little. Finally, he said, Ellie, yes, really, are we going to argue about this? Well, I guess not. Don't we need something like this someday? Well, I guess so. And with that, they both laughed, lit up another cigarette, and enjoyed the rest of their lunch. It's hilarious, right?
But 12 sites, 12 grave sites for $200.
What a deal.
What a deal.
1963, come on.
Yeah, that's true.
That was a dead on story. Dead on.
She was dead on, no pun intended. Oh my goodness, that was marvelous. Yes, I mean,
Thank you.
we are looking at grave sites and they're not cheap at all. So that is amazing. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
And Dia de los Muertos was well represented tonight. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right. So I see that Nathan has come in, and Nathan was actually at our concert and was very willing to share a tale at our concert, but we did run out of time. So we're so happy that Nathan Hale is here tonight. And Nathan, would you like to come up and share?
Sure.
Is it a poem or is it a story?
It's a story.
Okay.
A Thanksgiving
gonna-
story.
Oh, very cool. Don't you look handsome?
Thank you.
Nathan, we might need to adjust. Go ahead and scoot on back.
Okay.
There you are.
Okay. Well, I've heard, okay, you're probably all familiar with the ship, the Mayflower. And so tonight I'd like to tell you a story for Thanksgiving about one of the passengers on the Mayflower. Now, a long time ago, the Pilgrims had left the ship where the Pilgrims are getting ready to leave England. Now they're to travel to the New World. But the best time to leave England to the New World was sometime between February and March. At first, the Pilgrims boarded one ship called the Speedwell, but when they first tried to set out, it started leaking like mad. So they returned back to port, and then they tried to fix all the holes, and so then they set sail again. But again, the Speedwell leaked, and so then they turned around again, and they realized there was just no way they were going to fix the Speedwell in time. And so then, it wasn't until late in the August when they boarded the Mayflower, which was then take them to America. Now, as you know, the Mayflower was a very small old merchant ship. It was never designed to carry people. But however, the Mayflower was carrying 49 men, 30 children, and over 20 women. One of those male passengers was named John Howland, and this was his story. It was a dark and stormy night out on the Atlantic Ocean. The Mayflower was tossing and pitching and tumbling in the waves like a toy sailboat, and all the passengers on board were miserable and terrified. They had never been so seasick in all their lives. And so John Howland couldn't stand it anymore, and he went up on deck to get a breath of fresh air. Suddenly, as soon as he got up on deck, a huge wave swept over the ship, and John was knocked into the ocean. Poor John was tossing and splashing and thrashing and tumbling in the waves, desperately trying to keep his breath. Luckily for him, a rope was dangling over the side of the Mayflower, and he grabbed onto it, but he still fought for his life in the waves, and more than once then he went underwater and nearly drowned. But fortunately for him, the crew that was up on deck at the time heard his calls for help, and they came running over to the side of the deck to where the rope was, and they pulled and tugged with all their might until finally John was brought back up on deck. And as for the rest of the story, the Mayflower arrived in America on November 11th, 1620, and John Howland lived a good, long, happy, and successful life. He got married and he had 10 children and 88 grandchildren. And as a matter of fact, there are over 2 million of his descendants living in America today. And if John Howland hadn't been rescued that night, we wouldn't have had 3 U.S. presidents, Franklin D. Roosevelt, George H.W. Bush, and George W. Bush to be exact, and we wouldn't have had actors like Humphrey Bogart, Chevy Chase, and Alec Baldwin. And that's my story. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Nathan, boy, you took us on that Mayflower, that Speedwell and the Mayflower. My goodness, that was amazing. And we had no idea. Did anyone know about that? That is amazing. To think back about our ancestors and who we are actually connected to. Boy, there's stories in that. You did a great job, Nathan. Thank you so much. My goodness. All right. So with that, oh, by the way, let me just kind of give you a little tidbit. If you don't already know, Nathan, who just told fabulously, by the way, he is SASA's representative for the Rising Star concert at the Texas Storytelling Festival in March. And he's working on what kind of story to tell, but like that one was amazing. And I don't think anyone in the audience would even know that. So you better mark that down as one of our favorites because I learned so much. Yes. All right. So with that said, we have another storyteller who is also part of our concert. In fact, she ended with a very scary, if not the scariest tale of the night. It was amazing. It was a perfect way to end so no one could get any sleep Saturday night. So, and she, of course, has a repertoire of all types of stories. I'm going to bring Mary Grace Kettner up here right now. And those of you who don't know, who will be watching this later, Mary Grace actually started the San Antonio Storytellers over 30 years ago. So spread the word that San Antonio is alive and well with stories. We just need more members. So let everyone know that San Antonio does have storytelling going on. All right, Mary Grace, come on up.
Ooh, that's pretty. It's one of the proudest things I've done in my life, I think, is to be able to have something that I love so much blossom into such a lovely entity, I guess you'd say. Well, I'd like to tell you a story that's called The Tims. It was the original story came from Eleanor Farjeon. You probably know her as the person who wrote the lyrics to Morning Has Broken about 30 years before Cat Stevens recorded it. But she also wrote stories and poems for children. And this is one of my favorite. I have to say it's from Eleanor Farjeon because there are things that one sometimes changes with the times. Oh. Now, there were 5 Tims. There was old Tim, big Tim, little Tim, young Tim, and baby Tim. And they was all born wise. And whenever the people in that happy village had some little problem or something they were fretting about, or they were just feeling sorry for themselves, they would say, let's go and ask the Tims about it. They'll know what to do. And that's why Farmer John, one day when he had a problem, he thought of going to the Tims. You see, the beavers had slept in his barn that night, and they had gnawed all up and down the handle of his hay fork. And he went looking for old Tim, who was 80 years old. And he found him sitting on a stump out by the field, and he had his old clay pipe in his mouth. Well, hello, Farmer John. Hello, Tim, said Farmer John. Hello, Farmer John. What are you up to? Old Tim said. He took his pipe out of his mouth for a minute to talk. Well, I come to ask for your advice because you was born wise. And I had beavers staying in my barn last night, and they gnawed on the handle of my hay fork. And I come to seek your advice. What would you do if you was me? I'll do whatever you say. And old Tim took his pipe out of his mouth again, and he said, if I was you, I would go seek advice from my son, Big Tim. He's 20 years closer to the wisdom he was born with. Just go and ask him. And so that's exactly what Farmer John went. He went off looking for Big Tim. And he found him sitting on the fence with a stalk of wheat in his mouth. Maybe not a stalk. What would you call that? A straw of wheat in his mouth, kind of chewing on it, getting the sweetness out of it. And Farmer John said, hello, Big Tim. Why, hello, Farmer John. What brought you out this way? Well, said Farmer John, I tell you, I had beavers in my barn last night and told him all about the hay fork and everything. And he said, and I come to seek your advice as to what I should do about it because you was born wise. What would you do if you was me? I'll do whatever you say. And Big Tim gnawed on that wheat for a while, and then he took it out of his mouth. He said, I'll tell you what I would do. I would go see my son. He was born wise too, and he's but 60 years old. He ought to be able to help you. He's just that much closer to the wisdom he was born with than I am. And so Farmer John went looking for little Tim, and he found him down by the creek. He was eating an apple. Hello, hello, little Tim. That's the hard part of the story. Hello, little Tim, said Farmer John. I come to ask your advice. You see, you was born wise, and I have a problem. I have a situation here. And he told him all about the beavers and the hay fork and everything. And then he said, and what would you do if you was in my shoes? For you was born wise. I'll do whatever you say. And so little Tim, he thought about it, took another bite of his apple. And then he said, I'll tell you what I'd do. I'd go ask my son. He's just, where are we now? He's just 20 years old. Go ask young Tim. He's a lot closer to the wisdom he was born with than I am. And so Farmer John went off, and he found young Tim sitting on the back porch chewing on a toothpick. Hello, young Tim, said Farmer John. Why, Farmer John, how are you doing? What's going on? And Farmer John said, well, I he told him all about, the beavers and everything. He said, I come to ask you what I should do because you was born wise. What would you do if you was me? I'll do whatever you say. And young Tim said, if I was you, I would go ask my son. He's 20 years younger than mine. He's 6 months old. He is like the fountainhead of wisdom. Go and ask him. And so Farmer John went off looking for baby Tim, and he found him in his cradle. He was sucking on his thumb. Farmer John said, baby Tim, I heard you was born wise. I come to ask you what I should do about the beavers that was in my barn. And baby Tim, he says, I'll do whatever you say because you was born wise. Just tell me what I should do. And so baby Tim took his thumb out of his mouth and he said nothing. And so Farmer John went home and did it. And so Farmer John went home and did it. Now, I'm sorry. So now the people in that town, those happy people, they just kind of got in the habit of every time they had something that they needed solved, they went and found the Tims, and they ended up just doing nothing every time. Like when the miller's wife was washing clothes in the creek and her husband's handkerchief got away and flowed downstream, she did nothing. And when Molly Garden got a counterfeit sixpence in change from the peddler, she did nothing. And when the preacher come home late one night howling to the moon, everybody did nothing. Because they had a legacy of 5 generations of Tims who was all born wise. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. And if you don't like it, you can just go ask the Tims what to do about it, because they was all born wise.
Tim, and Tim. My goodness. Such wisdom. And I think we have all those Tims in just about every town we drive through. Truly. All right. We have another storyteller tonight who is also in our concert, by the way, Saturday night. He's going to share a really cool story with us having to do with Veterans Day. So we'd like to welcome up here John Hale. All right, John. We have 2 Hales here tonight, just spelled differently.
It was a time when the world was at war. Pearl Harbor had just been attacked, and the men and women of the United States felt the call, after all that they had been blessed by being a citizen of this nation. They needed to go to war and to fight against Nazis and their desire to put the Third Reich in control of Europe and in control of the world. So carpenters, mechanics, school teachers, every trade, every profession volunteered to go and to fight. And some of those had a special call to fly the jet fighters and the bombers. Some were already pilots, and others who had college education behind them, science teachers, engineers, even managers, were engaged in the flight training program and learned to fly so that they could engage the enemy. So off they went to Europe. And if you can imagine those pilots in the air And they would leave the UK, the United Kingdom, and they'd fly in formation as a team to take on the Luftwaffe that was threatening England, threatening France, and threatening the troops on the ground. And when they engaged, there was all kinds of positioning, and those pilots learning how to be very good fighter pilots very quickly. And they had to try to get the upper hand and maybe have the sun behind them and get the angle right to take out the enemy planes. And oftentimes they would work in pairs, and they were very careful to be able to protect their partner. Usually they took out many of those Luftwaffe planes before they turned back and retreated. And those planes had to have extra amount of fuel and extra tanks underneath their wing, oftentimes to fly at the distance that they went into the mainland of Europe. And then there was the extra special mission, which was to escort the bombers. Now, those men, they flew to protect liberty of those nations of Europe and their homeland. They fought together in the air to protect their fellow wingman and their team. And when they escorted those planes, they felt that importance to put those bombers in position where they could drop bombs on that enemy war machine, the factories that were building the bombs, the rockets, the ammunition. So when they escorted those bombers, it was a very important role. The bombers would stay up as high as they could be, and the pilots would engage the Luftwaffe fighter jets, fighter planes, when they'd come up to try to engage and take out those bombers. And there's flak being shot up from artillery into the air to try and hit those planes and cause damage, and so blow them out of the sky. And if you can imagine those Allied fighter pilots, British and American, Canadian, and even some from some of the other European countries, and they're escorting those bombers, and they're staying pretty close. And even though the Luftwaffe would try to entice them to come farther out, but they would be close by and protect those those bombers. And sometimes it was a long trip to go to those cities in Germany to take out that war machine, those factories. And they would get to a point where they realized, oh, I'm out of bullets. I'm out of ammunition. I need to turn back. And sometimes they had to turn back even before the bombers were at the target and leaving them vulnerable. But there was a time when the mission was so important, they had to put bombs on these factories that were far away. The pilots, they saw that with all the dogfights and the protecting that they were doing as escorts, had used up almost all their fuel. Many of their partners had already went back to the UK to land, but they had made the decision. They said, we have to put the bombs on target. And they committed, recognizing that they would die in the endeavor to keep those bombers in the air, to keep the Luftwaffe fighter planes away from those bombers. And sure enough, today, or this time of Veterans Day in the month of November, we think about those veterans, whether they were in the air or on the sea or on the ground, that even some gave all that they had to protect what we have today, liberty and freedom.
Veterans Day. November the 11th is Veterans Day. That's amazing. All right. I believe Chester has joined us. Thank goodness. You know, it's always wonderful to have our regulars on Zoom with us, and Chester's coming all the way from Oklahoma. And it's, I kind of missed him last month. I wasn't able to be here because I was up in Colorado. So whether you're here or not, you're all of you are missed if we don't see each other when it comes to stories and poems and music. And just on a whim, I thought maybe I can just ask Chester if he can join us. And immediately Chester said, absolutely. Or maybe twisting his arm a little bit, but so glad you're here. And sounds like you do have a wonderful, serious story tonight. And anything you have for us, we will enjoy. Thank you so much, Chester, for being here. And you have the stage.
Thank you, Sue, as always. Of course, I'm easy to get. I'm driven entirely by ego. So if I get a chance to show off, I'm going to jump on top of it. I was in Colorado too, some time ago, not long ago, but out at the Rocky Mountain Storytellers group. They had a story camp out there. If you ever get a chance, it's kind of interesting to do. There's some nice people, good tellers, and it's up in a church camp type setting with a nice lodge and good food and about 8,500 feet. And so it's kind of neat. Get to sleep and everybody else got to sleep in bunk beds, but they treated me extra nice and gave my wife and I a real queen bed. That was kind of special. So anyway, I know you wanted to know all of that.
Yes.
But anyway, I appreciate the chance tonight. This is a little story that it's a fairly new story for me. It's kind of a serious one. I did it a couple of weeks ago at a community thing here in town. And anyway, I was looking at the paper, a local paper here a few months ago, and there was a story in there about a man's funeral. And I'm not talking about an obituary, I'm talking about a story about his funeral. Evidently, he had been some sort of hero. And so I got into the article and read the article. As I read the article, memories came flooding into me. That article just brought up so many memories because I remember the time when he was a hero. It made all the papers. It's about 9 o'clock in the morning when I first experienced it. I wasn't sure what I'd experienced, whether it was a noise, it was a sound, it was a vibration, it was something, but it was kind of what was that type of moment. So I walked out into the hallway of the office building where I worked. I worked for Middale Schools, which is east of downtown Oklahoma City. It's a fairly large suburban school district of about 25 schools. I walked out in the hall, and there were some other people out there in the hall saying, "Hey, what was that? Did you experience that?" And so we were all kind of curious about it. And so I walked across on the other side of the building where I had some good friends in the curriculum department. And they had their televisions on by that time because they'd experienced something also. And said, "What was that?" And the TV channel was, they were saying, "Well, some calls have come in. We're trying to figure out what in the world is going on." And I will tell you, in the curriculum department, the secretary for the curriculum department, and later she was to become my secretary a few months later, and a lifelong friend, one of those kind of people that, well, I'll tell you how good of friends we are. We share grandparent stories now, so you know how good that is. But this news people said, and we were speculating. Now, my office building is about 1.5 miles north of Tinker Air Force Base, and they repair large aircraft there, all the big bombers, and they do lots of things. And so we got to thinking, well, could they have been testing one of those big engines off one of those big old aircraft? Or a few years ago, they had sonic boom tests. Could it have been that? Now, the other thing is, we're in an area with, surprisingly, central Oklahoma has a lot of earthquakes, especially for a period of time. Could it have been an earthquake we experienced? Or, more likely, people heat with natural gas, cook with natural gas, water heaters, natural gas. It's real rare, but occasionally you get an explosion. That's just the fact of life. It's not common, but it happens. So we're speculating on that. And like I said, over in the curriculum department, and same thing, the newspaper and the news broadcasting people were checking that out. And they said, well, we think there was an explosion downtown Oklahoma City. Well, the lady I was telling you about, her name was Lynn, who's my good friend. Her husband worked in an office building in downtown Oklahoma City. And then the news people are getting more and more information. They say, we think there was an explosion at the federal building in downtown Oklahoma City. Well, it turns out my friend Lynn, her husband was in charge of that building. And what we did not know, but we were soon to find out, that the time we were talking, her husband, name was Richard, was lying in the rubble in that building, one of the lucky ones, because 168 people died that day, along with about 19 children. That was the Malford P. Murrah terrorist attack, where the building was blown up. Terrible thing. The next few days, interesting things, though, happened in central Oklahoma. It was an experience that everyone in the state, especially in the metro area, experienced. Everyone drove with their lights on. Everyone, as they want to go downtown to see what it looked like, and you could do that. I did that. My wife and I did that. She insisted I turn my lights on. It was kind of a mark of respect. And it was quiet. It was really strange how quiet it was. You get down there to the bombing site. By this time, of course, they'd put up fences to keep out the curious people like us. And the fences were now becoming covered with dolls and paper things and writings and poems and flowers, all kinds of stuff. You drive down there and people come up to your car and say, hey, you need a sandwich? So many restaurants had donated so much food, they couldn't give it all away. They brought them in for the workers, but they couldn't give it all away, just so much. They put out a broadcast and say, the workers need AA batteries. 10 minutes later, they'd put out another broadcast and say, quit bringing batteries. We have more batteries than we can use. And that was kind of what it was like at that time. And those are part of the memories that flooded my brain from the article about this man who was a hero during that time. And I will tell you, there were probably hundreds of heroes, hundreds if not thousands of stories. But this was about a man who's 76 years old. He was there that day. He was on the 4th floor. His name was Washburn. He died at age 76. And this, of course, was in 95 when this happened. He ran the concession stand on the 4th floor. You know, like a lot of government buildings will have the concession stands, snack stands where you can get, if you're late to work, you can get a cup of coffee and a donut, or lunch, you get a sandwich, whatever it is, He was there at his concession stand when the bomb went off. He was there with one employee and 4 customers. Now, think about it a moment. I was about 10 miles away and I experienced something. Whether I heard it, felt it, I don't know. He was 100 feet away. Can you imagine what must have been going through his mind at that time? Can you imagine how dazed he must have been? I mean, I don't know what was the hearing like? Could you even hear? Or you just get ringing in your ear? I don't know. I don't know what it was like. I wasn't there. And the air had to be filled with particles of sheetrock when that building was, part of it was blown out. You've seen, I'm sure a lot of you have seen the pictures where the building's down at the, it's the base of the building, but a lot of it was. But Mr. Washburn gathered his wits about him and said, we have to get out of here. And he proceeded to lead the way out. Now, I would imagine all those folks, the one employee and the 4 customers, they were also dazed. And probably anybody that had a sense of control of who come with us probably was doing okay. I mean, not doing okay. I mean, they were just kind of, they were willing to follow is what I'm trying to say. So he said, come on, let's get out of here. And he led the way down the hall to the stairwell was 4 stories down, and so they start going down. And I don't know if they had lights in the stairwell. You know, sometimes they have those emergency lights that come on when all the power shut off, because you know the power is turned off for the building. So I imagine on one floor they probably had some lights, and the next floor maybe they didn't. I don't know. I didn't talk to anybody about that. But he finally took them down to the 4th floor, or the 1st floor, and out to where the rescue people were. So think about what he did. He was there on the 4th floor. This terrible explosion. Everybody's dazed. In the air, particles of the sheetrock. Just a terrible, terrible situation. We have to get out of here. And he led the way out to safety. And did I happen to mention that Mr. Washburn was blind? At the funeral, his close friend at the funeral said, he illuminated the way with his heart. One of many, as I said, hundreds and hundreds of stories, but it's still pretty fresh on my mind because of the people I knew. And as I said, the entire middle part of the state was affected. So that's my story. And thank you again for the opportunity to be part of the Storytellers group. And I hope I hadn't told that one before to you. I don't think I had. I checked my list, but I didn't think I had. But thank you very much for allowing me to come in there tonight.
Chester, everyone's clapping over here. That was very touching. And we'd love to hear those true personal stories. And he was blind, my goodness.
Yeah.
I mean, a true hero.
And you think about it, the particles in the air didn't affect him. The alternating light and dark didn't affect him. So anyway, thank you.
Oh no, thank you. And how important it is to cherish each and every one of us. And we cherish all of you guys on Zoom and all of y'all here. Thank you all so much. Stories are so powerful. We actually have another young man who's been visiting SASA for how many years, Tyler? Maybe like 5 or 4? What do you think? About 5 years before COVID. He was like shorter than me. And he's not shorter than me anymore. Tyler comes with his dad or his mom, and he comes and he's like the best listener ever. So we were just talking to Tyler before we all began here, and just asked if Tyler might have something he'd like to share, whether it's a story or an anecdote or just, how his Halloween was. That's how we all began, right? So we're going to, Tyler wants to share today because as all of us know, we are all storytellers. So Tyler, come on up here in your old Navy sweatshirt, handsome young man. And I'm going to pin this to you. I'm going to put it right here.
Okay.
All right, buddy. You just look blind. There you go.
Okay. Hey guys, this is my story of from yesterday where we had our dinners, and I hope you'll like it. So after our afternoon and morning on the 31st, which was yesterday, my mom, Zachary, and I went to get out our dinner. But we didn't get candy though. So first stop was Popeyes for Zachary. Popeyes reminded Zachary of like a turkey feast or something. And he didn't think of it much, but he was just he's just like his Popeyes, fried and cooked and like a Thanksgiving meal, sort of, kind of like in a southern restaurant. Now, as for me, we were going to Wendy's, and I got me the chicken nuggets and fries and a drink. That reminded me of like being a strong meat exerciser, and it made me jumping jacks and doing some push-ups, doing some chin-ups, doing some all kinds of stuff, even running on treadmills and running on the trails in the park. So once we've done that, we went back home, And when we ate them, we were fully energized, just like me trying to run on the treadmill and doing our exercise, sit-ups, push-ups, and jumping jacks stuff. And Zachary's was like when he's like a Thanksgiving meal and he wanted to be satisfied and grateful for what he had. So after our meals, we didn't have candy though, but we had fun, watched a movie, and went to bed. And that's what we pretty much did. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Thank you
You're
so
welcome.
much. Oh, every word came out splendidly. And I want to go to that restaurant that makes me energized and running and doing jumping jacks. So I've got to remember that. And how nice to be grateful for all of that. A little bit of Halloween Thanksgiving. That's fabulous. I am wondering, it may be time to close down. I'm not sure. Did Jane ever make it? Oh, there's Jane. Yay. Okay. So we do have another teller tonight. So Jane McDaniel, of course, those of you who know, she is definitely a big part of San Antonio Storytellers. She was also at our concert Saturday night, and she's here to share another tale. So without further ado, Jane McDaniel. So I was, I'm not wearing my glasses. Jane,
Unmute, Jane. Unmute, Jane.
So Jane, we cannot hear you. So
All right, should be unmuted now. Is it better now?
yes, thank you.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you. I gotta say that our family has got to be the most superstitious family around. My father used to always say, be careful of Friday the 13th, something will happen. And he was a cobbler. He wouldn't put new shoes on the table because it was bad luck. And I did experience one Friday that was the worst Friday ever. Turned out good in the end, but it was rather scary. And I've been reading up on slave stories, what they call slave stories. I don't know why they call them that. Maybe because they're told by slaves. But there was a guy called, a boy called Little 8 John, whom I brought into my heart. And Little 8 John was ornery. He always did the opposite thing that his mother told him to do. Now, we kids knew that if we did something like that, we'd be in big, big trouble. But Little 8 John didn't have any problem with that. His mother would tell him to do something, and he did exactly the opposite. If she told him not to do it, he would do it. If she told him to do it, he wouldn't do it. I tell you, that's as ornery as it gets. And one day she called him and she said, come on, little John, come in. He was outside playing. She said, come in, we've got to go to church. It's time to leave. So, and he loved going to church. So he came running in, and he loved going to church because he loved to catch any bugs that he could find in the church, under the seats, under the benches, and squash them between the pages of hymn books. Now, anybody can do that, but the problem was if he did that, something would happen. And he loved it to see that people were unhappy when he did that. He loved people's misery. That's the way he was. And on his way home from church, his mom, she was used to him, but she said to him, Little 8 John, don't on the way home, don't stomp on the toads and the frogs. Just keep off them. It's a mess what you make. It'll bring bad luck if you do it. Of course, little John did that. It made him laugh and giggle just to see what would maybe happen. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. He'd say, can I go play on the bayou? and not get dirty if I don't get dirty? And she said, yeah, you can do, just don't get dirty. And he would go down there because he knew there were lots of frogs and toads down there, and he would jump on them. And his sister would wake up. She woke up once with whooping cough the next day, and nobody knew what caused it, but nobody but little John, that is. And he was laughing so hard, he had to cover his head with a pillow to keep from being heard. And don't sit backwards on your chair, little 8 John, his mom said. It's bad luck, and bad things happen if you do it. So he said, oh, I won't sit backwards, Mom, I won't do that. But next day, when his mama was cooking cornbread, he did sit backwards on his chair. And while he was sitting backwards on his chair, she was cooking cornbread, and that cornbread, it burned to a crisp. And his dad went outside to milk the cow, and the cow gave curdled milk. Well, she knew she couldn't stop him, but she was always after him. So she said one day, she said, when he was going to bed, don't sleep with your head at the foot of the bed. You know it brings bad luck. I wonder where she got all of this. And of course, little 8 John said, oh no, I would never do that. No, I always sleep the right way around. But as soon as everybody was in bed and all the lights were on, he turned around and he slept with his head at the foot of the bed. She had said, it'll make people poor if you do that. Well, it did, because next day all the hiding places for money were gone, were dry. She told him not to moan and groan on Sundays. Now, I was told that I shouldn't cry on my birthday, because then I would cry for 40 days. And I believe that. I never tried to cry on my birthday, even though there were lots of chances, because I didn't get what I wanted, or because my sister got a present as well. But little 8 John, he moaned and groaned on that Sunday following, when his mom had said that. And he moaned and groaned on Saturday just to get ready for Sunday. And he moaned and groaned on Monday as well. And he did that for weeks on end. She said that raw head and bloody bones would come and get him if he did that. But he did that so many weeks, he knew it wasn't going to happen. One night he was in bed on his own, and raw head and bloody bones came creeping out of the woods across to the house. And he heard them coming up the wall, crawling up the ivy on the outside to his window, and opening his window, and he ducked down underneath the covers and pulled the blanket way up over his head. Bloody Bones came into the room and shook and shook and shook him and shook him till he was just a bloody spot. And as he left the house, he wiped that spot on the wall as he left the back door. The mother was cleaning the kitchen the next day, and with a rag, she cleaned that spot off the wall. And she said, I told that boy to wash his hands. Sometimes he just won't listen. But little 8 John was no more. He couldn't listen, even if he had wanted to, anymore. And that's my story.
Yes. So, Jane, that was amazing. Yeah, I was just talking all about your story. Sorry you didn't hear any of it. That was amazing.
I was afraid it didn't come through. Thank goodness.
It did. In fact, you just kind of wiped him away with that last bit of blood. So
yes,
that's what happens. A warning for all those types of kids, of which we have none anymore, except maybe after COVID. Maybe we do. Who knows? All right. I want to make sure that I have everyone who wanted to share a tale. Everyone? Yes. Okay. Well, then this, sadly, is the end of our SASA story night for November. We hope that everyone celebrates and shakes hands and hugs all the veterans on November the 11th, and also gratitude and thoughts of kindness and friendship and compassion come up right around Thanksgiving time, whether you celebrate that or not. We hope and wish you all a wonderful, fabulous November. And as tradition has it, I have to say this: rabbit, 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 because it is November the 1st. And if you've not heard that before, we try to present rabbit, rabbit, rabbit to the first person you see, the first moment you realize it's the first day of the month. And when you say that, it's to say, may you have all the best luck and may all good things happen to you for the month of November. So do that each month and say it to whoever's right next to you, whoever you're waking up with. And it seems to help. And we'll see what happens. But have a wonderful November. And thank you to all the tellers tonight. How about everyone give yourselves a big hand? Yes. And let's see if I can bring this camera around.
Oh, yeah.
Let's see. Oh.
Show me who's there.
There they are. Oh, don't hide. Oh, what a great looking group. Yay.
And then I bring it all over.
Ooh, everyone.
Mark, Bob, and
Oh,
then-
there's Mark.
Hey, Mark.
Hi, Susan.
Okay, so let me turn this around again.
Hi, Laura.
Sue,
Yes, ma'am.
Sue, I have another story if there's room for it.
I think we're out of time.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Shop and get it going.
Thank you.
Out of here by 8. But
Yes.
thanks everyone so much. We really
Good night,
appreciate it.
everybody. Good night.
Good night.
Night, night. Rabbit, rabbit.
Rabbit.